I'm going to wait until 9:35 to kick it off officially. I will let you guys know we're obviously presenting. We've got people from the companies that they come from, but let's just pretend for a moment that we don't work anywhere, take our hats off, and we're just going to talk about workflows today. With that said, I guess high level, guys, for those of you who are with us, I guess in chat or kind of out loud, if you would, are you using workflows? What do you want to get out of this session? And I don't know, what's stopping you from using workflows? Like, just feel free to pop that into chat. That's really going to help us shape the conversation with my panel of experts who are experting.
You use that word liberally, Jay.
Panel of experts. I mean, you guys know the most, so I'm hoping you're my experts. I think also I want to let you guys know, just kind of high level, like what are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish here? You know, this is a community session. I've been kind of organizing stuff like this for years now, trying to bring people from the community, people from Domo, people who want to present and talk about things kind of into a space where we can just exchange ideas, learn some stuff from each other, and maybe keep on the cutting edge of what's going on in the world of Domo. So while I do have representatives from Domo here, one, I don't work for Domo, and just to be clear, this is not, you know, a Domo event per se. I think that's all of the preamble. Let me just go through some of these comments that came through. John says he wants to do a workflow from scratch. I think we're going to have some examples of people running through some. Obviously, given the amount of time we have, I don't know how slowly we're going to be able to go, but we do have an hour of content and then half an hour where we'll just leave the floor open and you guys can shoot the stuff, as it were, to kind of go over things. Elliot says one of his bigger roadblocks is being comfortable with other platform as a service. Being more comfortable with, yeah, okay. So like I think you're saying tools like Zapier or Make.com are just more familiar, and so it's a little bit faster to kind of get to it. Ben says, no commercials. There are no sales guys here. Yes. Bobby uses them, but devs find the interface and passing data between tasks confusing. I mean, I'm not going to lie. When I looked at it for the first time, I kind of had the same experience. I was just like, I don't actually know what the first button to click is. And I think, Dan, you know, that's one of the things I kind of fed back to you as I was prepping everyone for the call is I'm like, the first 10 clicks, talk me through those first 10 clicks. And like, if you've done integration before, the rest of it hopefully somewhat makes sense. But I think to your point, Bobby, like those first 10 clicks of like understanding the UI and kind of what we're looking at is a little bit challenging. And then Nate says he's going to go to his hotspot. Okay. All right. Cool. So, again, guys, if you will, feel free to drop some more comments of things we want to make sure to kind of get through this next hour and a half. But I think I'm going to just go ahead and launch us into it. Ben, I see Trevor's here. Dan, you're here. One of you guys, please tell us, what is Workflows? What was the vision behind it? High level and in 10 minutes.
So I could start, and then I would maybe default to Trevor, Ryan, and Dan. You know, Trevor and Ryan being the closest to the development. So I can paint a bigger picture, and then we could start getting into smaller picture, and then to those first 10 steps and those things you were talking about. So here I have some slides. Yeah, so a few thoughts. One is, you know, I think it's certainly we're in general, but I think where Domo excels and some of the themes you heard at Domopalooza, like I don't think, at least for me, and some of the people here might be different, right? If you're more technical, you are looking for a specific solution. Like I'm looking for, you know, a workflow engine or an iPaaS. I'm looking for a BI tool. I'm looking for an app dev tool, an ETL tool, all these other things. I think where we excel the most and where Domo sort of differentiates is like it's like people are really just trying to solve problems, and these are the tools they need. If we get, you know, too specific into one of those, there's always things we can certainly do to make Domo better. But often, like you have bespoke solutions that might be very specific to this one function, but they get lost, and we've all seen it, right? You get lost in the handoffs and the different teams and communicating between the tools, and so that's sort of where I view our core persona. Related to that, if I think about, I've been doing this, probably, I don't know how many years we have on this, this meetup of like trying to figure out like that holy grail of BI. Like, what does it mean to actually, yes, I have a dashboard, but it's like, now what, right? And so I think a lot of our strategy around workflows and other parts of the platform is this idea of, like, I don't just want the dashboard, I want to do something, right? So some of that is where I bring the information, right, via mobile, via apps, right? So it's not just in like headquarters, right? Like it's in the store, like when I worked at Target. How do you, integrate with the work that has to be done, right? So with embed and other things, into where the actual decisions are making. But then how do you start facilitating processes, but then also automating activities, with proper human reviews, which becomes even more important, I think, in the world of AI, because as you're trying something new, as you don't know if you fully trust the AI, having that human in the loop motion becomes more and more important and more critical to what we're doing.
Can you go back to your previous slide? I just wanted to add, like, kind of to your point, and I think Elliot and I were kind of chatting about this earlier. He is obviously on his YouTube channel has some integrations using make.com. He's familiar with Zapier. One of the challenges that I have at the enterprise that I'm at is we're like, well, we can't just spin up software and just start using it. We have to use approved software.
Yep.
And so when Domo has features like workflows or that Domo integration, as we have features just kind of baked into the platform, my developers don't have to start looking, okay, what piece of tooling can I spin up to get started? And so I think, to your point, Ben, like, if I need something really bespoke and specific and I have to use, I don't know any automation tooling.
Zapier or whatever.
Zapier, right. I can't just do that. Okay, I've got Domo. Great, cool.
Yeah.
That's a place that I can get started.
Right.
So I think that certainly really resonated to me. And then coming back to your other slide where you were talking about like, okay, I've got this dashboard, what next? I do recall, like, before DDX, before DDX and really custom apps kind of came into their day, and certainly before App Devs or App Studio, if I had an action that I wanted to perform, like, okay, I've got this piece of text and I want to send it to an API and, I don't know, do some tagging on it and then do that human in the loop stuff. That part was a lot harder to kind of have to program. And I think, workflows and code engine are hopefully going to give us a space where we can make it easier to program some of these actions that we might want to do. Some of them might be internal automation on the governance side, or it might be external, hitting data and APIs
or
and stuff.
also, it could be external, like a true third-party system, or it could be, proprietary system at your company that you still need to be able to access and have some customization around. So yeah, I think, and that is a lot of where it fits in. And this is what we flashed on the big stage at Domopalooza. But I think, for a long time, Domo really focused on these integrate and interaction pieces, right? How do I get the data ready and available, and how do I then, create really good interactions, whether it's, using Domo everywhere or just using apps or dashboards. We had, bits of automation, right? If you think about scheduled reports, or even alerts, right? Sort of go in that automate bucket. But, it's with workflows that we've really come into our own and really invested into this bucket. And I think I'll just say, I think the reason, because I think, conversely, I think that the other thing we think about is if you did, even if you went through all the approval, right, to do a bespoke solution, I think a lot of what you find is, great, I have this really great automation tool. I really need to prep my data. I need to make sure it's good. I need to report back on information that happened from the workflow. I need to work on security, all those things, similar to what we talked about with apps. But
yeah,
so like, yes, you might say, okay, this is, I wanted to use this other automation tool, but to make it really valuable, to really solve that problem, you need all these other things, right? And so if you already, certainly if you're already a Domo user and you've already done a lot of the work to get your data in good shape, that's even better. You don't even have to do that. But even if you're sort of net new, the value isn't just the automation. The value is automation on top of the properly enriched and cleansed data, which might be combined in an Excel file with something you have in Snowflake, right? It is only as good as the ability for people to access it and review it and integrate it into those places where they work via an app or Brick or App Studio. And so I think that's where it all sort of comes together for me, of that, like, if we were saying that there's no value from, basically we're saying like there's not a lot of value from the integrate and interact pieces to make automate work better, it would be a much harder sell, right? It could still be what we could do, right? But it would be like, oh God, we're like going into this entirely different space. But I think the reality is, to really be successful at automation and workflows and those things, you need the integration and interaction so that you make it come to life and make it real. And so that's where I think we sit well relative to maybe other tools, or just how it fits into the overall system. And
yeah, and I love the framing, because that's where it came from. You know, I've been at Domo for over 11 years now, and over the last about 6, I've spent most of my time on the app framework side of things. And a big reason that I love that is because of the way that it allows our customers to solve problems and take action. And, you know, so that kind of is where this came from, this idea that we can help customers solve a lot of problems and, you know, build these amazing solutions with this tool that can not only be an interaction point in the browser, but also offline and just running when it needs to run. But the context was that it came about through this ideation of how do we help apps be more powerful, really, and how do we help Domo be more powerful. And this is such a nice framework for doing that, and it also does it in a way that's not particular to the most technical crowd. And in true Domo fashion, we want to enable as much of the business as possible to take action on their data, to automate, to build solutions. And, you know, we've spent a lot of time over the years trying to build that capability into various parts of Domo. And I think this fits really nicely in that whole realm. So, you know, part of it came about is, how do we build a back end for your app? Basically, that's one piece. And then just, we had some people on our team that luckily had built something really cool in a previous life in workflows, and we said, that's the solution. Let's build that. It gives our customers so much power, and obviously we've learned along the way. Unfortunately, we started a while ago, but, you know, we had to do a bunch of different things in the meantime, including COVID and
including COVID.
So,
yeah,
you know, we would love to have come out about 2-3 years ago, but, you know, lots of
we are where we are.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to Dan in just a moment, but I think I wanted to just mention one thing real quick. Ben, I always harp at Domo, like, think about the developers, make it better experience for the developers. And I had this really humbling moment the other day where I use GitHub to back up all of this code that I generate in Domo. And then Git Guardian says, hey, Jay, you have usernames and passwords on the internet. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's not great. And so I think, you know, just strictly thinking about it from the governance perspective, like, why should I use a tool like Workflows that's integrated into Domo? Well, for starters, it's very secure, right, guys? Like, you're not worried about downloading your data to your computer and running scripts over them. You're not worried about sending your data to platforms that you don't know. And in a way, one thing I really appreciate about Domo is it kind of protects you from having to know best practices. I have a coworker who will remain unnamed who like really struggled to figure out how to use a .env file so that they didn't have to put their username and password in clear text. Well, if you use Domo accounts, and as Domo accounts become more pervasive across the platform, I never have to worry about my username and password being stored in the scripts that I'm generating if I know how to use Domo accounts. And so I think that kind of stuff, as we see that better integration in DDX, as we start seeing that integration, you know, in App Studio, I think it'll allow us to develop faster without focusing on having to know best practices or worrying about exposing the wrong stuff if I don't know best practices. But okay, let me set all that aside. I know we're here for the demo. So Dan, please walk us through something amazing.
Walk you through something amazing.
I'm ready to be blown away.
we got lots of examples of workflows. I know Jay, you'd kind of initially mentioned walking through that simple one that we did in the training at Domo+DataCrew, where we've got a brick that kicks off a workflow that sends a request for approval. I don't know if you want to focus on something with that level of simplicity and digestibility, if you will, or if we want to talk about something that's got a little bit more sex appeal and has a little bit more meat to it.
I'm gonna vote for simple, but let me see. Okay, everyone in Slack, say 1 for simple to understand the concepts, 10 to go straight to 11. 1 or a 10.
We got some ones.
We have nobody else is voting. All right, everybody says 1. And Dan, honestly, I think that's appropriate because like I said at the beginning, I think the hardest part is those first 10 clicks.
Right.
So let's start there. And then what we're also going to do, guys, kind of towards the middle is we're going to do a lightning round where you're just going to like blurt out use cases for workflows. And then maybe we can use that as a starting point of a conversation, Dan, if we want to do another example or just talk through how we might approach it.
Yeah,
okay.
Cool. All right, so I'll share out my screen here. This is in Jay, you want me to do this in
Domo
10
community?
minutes?
10 minutes, yes.
Okay.
15
we
at a
can do
stretch.
we can do it in whatever instance we want to. You'll see, we can ultimately have it land there. This is the session that we used at the training at Domo+DataCrew. So since I've already got it here, it's what we'll run with. But the use case that we set out to solve here was somebody makes a request for something, right? In our example, we mocked up, you can see we've got event name, budget, cost center, and executive approval. The idea here is someone's requesting budget to put on a event, a marketing event. But I don't think that's important to what we're talking about. The takeaway in this, and during the training, we built and deployed and ran 3 different workflows. This was the second one, and some of the key concepts we wanted users to take away was how to have a brick interface with a workflow. We talked about required start parameters within a workflow. Talked about user tasks, forms, and conditional gateways. We'll talk about some of that today. So here is the workflow that I built, nope, not that one, during the training. Oh my gosh. We had a lot of people in there. Here we go. And we can click through and Jay, do we want to actually build it or do we just want to walk through and see what it does? Should we build it from scratch?
Can you build
the first
2 steps?
Sure. Yeah. So here's the process that I always take when I build a workflow.
I noticed there was the option to do templates. Trevor, what are those?
Yeah. Trevor, you want to answer that?
You're muted. I'm like holding my breath with excitement.
Yeah, find the mute button. Templates, it's great. It's really just a workflow. And so we can publish these really quickly. If we have more examples we'd like to publish, then happy to do so. So these are just some generic starting points. It's because of what you said, Jay. We recognized a year or so ago that this just getting started is the hardest part. So let's give them somewhere to start from. So all it is a pre-built workflow that's not necessarily hooked up to anything interesting for you, but it has the pattern already in place.
So like a quick start.
Yep. This is
nice.
A very common one. Dan clicked on that because it's probably the one he starts with every time. It's just start with data, query your data, pull it in, and do something with the rows in that data. Mm-hmm. And that's what this template's about. And there's a bunch of other templates that you'll find useful as well.
Yeah, Elliot says he can't wait to try the buzz message one. And frankly, that's the one that kind of caught my eye because like if I can do some sort of a workflow that uses webhooks, I think that might start. That might be sexy. Okay, all right. Let's not derail.
To do with that.
Let's not derail the demo. First 3 clicks.
The templates are great, and to Trevor's point, you're gonna see more of those roll out soon. We've got some in the hopper, but we're going to build this, Domo community workflow. One thing that I always do, you guys will learn as you're building workflows. In order to run it, you got to deploy it. Every time you deploy it and then you want to change it, you got to make a new one. So I always start with version 0.0.1. You'll come up with your own kind of naming convention that works for you, but that's usually where I like to start.
Wait, pause for a second. You said you have to deploy it. So it sounds like it's similar to Sandbox, Sandbox, where I might have a commit and what is it called when I do the opposite of a commit? Promote? Like that kind of a thing?
So yeah, the way the workflows work, in order for a workflow to be ran, it needs to be deployed. That makes it available. And once a workflow is deployed, since we don't understand upstream and downstream dependencies, a deployed workflow can't be edited, right? So
cannot be edited ever again.
Nope.
Yeah, it just means you have to version it if you want to change something. But the point is that's production. It's running in production now, right?
Right. So if I'm making incremental changes, I would want to deploy a second version or a third version, but be able to kind of noodle on it without it impacting production.
Yeah, exactly. And you may have a bunch of things hooked up to that workflow, right? You may have an alert to trigger it. If you change the workflow, that can break that connection, break the alert. Same with an app, any kind of app, brick, whatever. It could be configured to trigger that workflow. Well, if you change the signature or what the workflow does, you're going to break that app or whatever it is that's connected. I hope that helps connect those pieces.
So guys in the community, I hope that kind of makes sense why I'm belaboring this point, right? Kind of like Sandbox with promotion or with publish and refreshing your assets, right? Having that step that separates I'm noodling on it from I'm ready to create a new version is kind of critical. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
Well, sorry, one thing to add to on the other side of the fence here is with Code Engine, it also has versioning within the package itself. So similarly, when you create a Code Engine package and you want to edit it, you also first have to deploy it and then you have to create a new version. And it's the same thing, right? Where if you have workflows that tons of people are using within your company and you change a function, it could break a workflow. So you also need to upgrade the version of a Code Engine package within a workflow and vice versa. So versioning, shout out to the versioning there. It's great.
Yeah, and just think of that as the same as apps. That's where it came from, right? We understand that apps can't just change. You can't just change an app. It breaks a lot of stuff if you do. So same idea, right? Just flows all the way through these products.
Love that.
Okay, cool. So when and I appreciate the comments, so keep them coming. So one thing that I do when I build a workflow, it's really easy to get kind of hung up with figuring out how to make that that first step actually do something. So what's super helpful for me is to just almost use this as like a charting system to get my process down and get consensus with my other stakeholders around the process that I'm creating and all the steps that are necessary. So we'll get into message start or timer start as time permits. You can select either one. You can change it here, so it's not like you're locking yourself into something. But
and I'm on a pretty small screen. Can you zoom in a couple times? Like these old eyes. Thank you.
Like that?
That's beautiful.
Or you want me to zoom the whole browser in? Okay. Cool.
The whole browser, actually, to be honest.
Okay, let me zoom that back out and.
That'll work.
Starting to get a little constrained. Okay, cool. Somebody make note and get you a new computer monitor.
All right. I'm in my van, man. What do you want?
I'm just teasing. The good news is we don't need a ton of space here. So, but what I'll do is I'll start to just add shapes to the canvas to get my process down. So in this scenario, right, someone's making a request. We're going to send that request to somebody else to get their approval, and then based on their response, we're going to do something. And so And it doesn't even matter which type of shape you add, right? So I'll just add service tasks and I'll say, send request for approval, right? That's my first step is, hey, I want to do this. Now I need to ask Ben or Trevor or Jay, is this okay? They're going to respond. And then based on that response, right? And this is where I'll use a conditional gateway, like, hey, is request approved, right? And you call these whatever you want to. And then I'll have my path for, and we've got a release to fix those lines. It's coming out in a couple of weeks, but is it approved? No. What do we want to do if it's not approved? We want to send, a notification. If it is approved, what do we want to do? We want to, let's also, I don't know, send another notification, right?
Okay, wait, pause. I'm
yeah.
I'm trying to play catch up here. Can you just show me all of the different buttons I could click off of a node?
Yeah, totally. So we've got, and it's not worth spending too much time on this right now because this summer, this action menu is going to change. We're going to simplify it a little bit, but you've got service tasks. That's where it runs a code engine function, which we'll learn more about today, it sounds like. You got user tasks, which is where you prompt someone to do something and the workflow waits until they do it. You got conditional gateways, which can go down one of many paths based on different criteria. You got parallel gateways. So that says, hey, I'm going to go do all these things at the same time. Parallel gateways can be used to send out divergent processes, but also to bring them together. And then you got timer, which is going to wait. And then you got an end event and connect to, basically create a line that goes to another existing shape.
Okay. All right. Like I said, guys, first 10 clicks. I hope that kind of helps you get an idea of your first 10 clicks. But it sounds like the one we should always go for is the first one. Just always click the first one and then add your logic later.
And
Well,
you
the
can
most
change
important thing-
it,
Sorry,
right?
Dan.
That's what I was going to say is I just add those because, ultimately this is going to be a user task, but I can just change it to a user
Get
task.
out.
So I don't want to get too
Love
hung
it.
up thinking about, you know what I mean? I just want to get the process down and then I can go to my other stakeholders and say, hey, am I missing anything, right?
Yeah. Just real quick for the folks that are seeing this for the first time, do you guys have any big outstanding questions? Or is this kind of really helpful for, like I said, those first 10 clicks? Because from here, I'm like, okay, now I can do this. But what are you guys feeling in terms of scaffolding it out? And if you have no responses, we're going to keep going. No questions, keep going.
Let me just
right.
quickly just say that really those first two things are just actions you want to take. So just put an action down, right? What is the action you want to take? Think of it through that way. And then do I need to make any decisions? And that's really what those items are. And then you can worry about the particulars later, as Dan's saying.
Love that. Cool. We're a little pressed for time. I know I keep distracting. Can we, let me stop talking. Go. You just go.
Yeah, so here we'll be quick, right? So basically, what I'm going to do on each of these, on each side of this thing, is I'm just going to put an end or a stop shape. Again, we get in more of that. That doesn't necessarily kill the workflow. It just means, if whatever different processes you have running all resolve to one of these, that's when the workflow is complete. So I'll get my ideas down on the canvas, and then from there I start thinking about, okay, what does it actually need to do now, right? And this is where I'll go back to the beginning and I'll start to build out my variables and have my actions perform certain things, right? So if we go to this, where we send this for approval, we've got a couple of configuration types. Don't want to belabor these too much. You're going to use form most of the time, and we're going to put that in a queue. Again, this isn't intended to be an in-depth training, but this is where where we'll build out our form and where we start to introduce ourselves to data types, right? So, I'll create my form where I map in, my event name, right? And I can indicate if this accepts an input, provides an output. We got training on each one of these elements. But I'll then go through and I'll start to configure each one of my functions, right? And if I were building this form properly, at some point we would have a question like, is request approved, right? And it's either going to be yes or no. So let's say that we want a drop-down menu with options of yes and no. And this is going to provide an output back to the workflow, right? So we can see that this is where we start to introduce you to variables, right? This workflow is going to provide a variable, or this form, I'm sorry, is going to provide a variable back to my workflow. Hey, is this request approved, right? And each one of these functions, you'll start to see wants input and output parameters. So those are items that are stored in variables. They can be fed in to start the workflow, right? We can configure, like in this case, we can't really start this workflow unless we know what the event name is, right? So we're going to require an event name before the workflow can even start. We'll build out our list of variables and then start to configure actions for each one of those. Again, I don't know how deep you want to go here because we are time constrained.
I'm dumb. Hold on, I missed it. So your first action starts a thing. Your second one is that human in the loop thing, and that's where you set that to the little person icon, and that's where we start defining our form.
Yep, exactly. So I could say, hey, I want Ben to approve. Ben's not in here. I want James Bogart, whoever that is going to approve this thing. And that could be dynamic, again, based on the variable, if I had a person variable, but yes.
Gotcha. Okay, and then just real quick, can you click that select configuration type for me, that drop down? Okay, so you can either configure an email or you can configure a form as a way for people to interact. Fantastic. And then high level, walk me through what a queue is.
Yeah, so a queue is what the ultimate end user interface looks like. So I'm going to go to a different tab here. You can see here in my DP marketing budget approval queue, there's a request for DP event training with a budget of 5 for
That's
marketing.
The original form you built. Okay.
This is a user task. It was created by user Domo 16 in our Domo training. But pretend that, if you think about it in the real world and you're approving lots of things, right? You might have 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 requests here. And this is where you would come and say, hey, I'm going to approve it. Good luck out there. Whatever I want to say, good luck out there.
We did also release an iOS app called Domo Approval Center. Is that what it's called, Trevor, in the App Store?
Domo Tasks.
Task Center. So it's sort of cool. Like you could actually manage your queue from your phone, right? And so I think this is where, for me, like if you think about, for internal things, where like cleaning up, like I know some people have looked at cleaning up new or reviewing new dashboards, right? You empowered all these people. You want to have a set of eyes on them to make sure, is this appropriate or whatever? Mm-hmm. Okay, you go through and check it on my phone and say approved. Or especially with AI, right? It's like I want AI to generate an email to customers. If the customer is more than $100 million customer or $10 customer, whatever it is, I want to go to a queue first. I could go through on my phone and say, does this email make sense? Yes, 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 no. The no's get held back and I go and, do a manual email to them or whatever. So I think there's just that human in the loop motion and having a way to do it on your phone. Like, I think that's we talk about it a lot, but I think that especially in the world of AI, when I'm asking AI to do something, I think that's just a huge unlock. It's because you're not going to necessarily trust it right away to just do it all.
Nice. And then real quick, like, ultimately the person that's going to be filling out this form, to your point, Ben, you said, okay, we have an app for that. Fantastic. Where are some other places in Domo that I can interact with this form? Because hopefully I don't have to guide people to queues, because God help me.
Well, I mean, Trevor, when he finds the mute button, he can comment on it. But one thing to point out, and I'll stop sharing so I have that distraction for just a second, is that when a task gets assigned to a user, they get a notification, right? So let's pretend that I'm the person that's going to approve Jay's request, right? I'm going to get a notification of my choosing. It could be a push notification in that app, could be an email. Domo's got lots of options there. And that's not just a notification saying, hey, you got to do something, but it's a rich notification that says, hey, there's this task for Jay in this queue, click here, and it goes right to that action. Right.
So people go back to the queue to actually approve or deny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they got Jay, a link that goes straight to it.
Yeah, this is something we're working on, but at the same time, we've decided not to break into how we rearrange all of these features, because as you may have seen at Domo+DataCrew, we're redoing the entire structure of our navigation. So I apologize for now. It is kind of hidden under the workflows umbrella, but think of that as becoming a more of a first-class citizen for sure, a way to get your work done, right? We want to surface those up.
All right, I'm gonna have to put a pin on our demo, Dan. I know we didn't get through everything, but I know Nate has a demo of something that he's actually done in real life for work that he kind of wanted to share with the community. He has a very hard cutoff. He's hanging out in New York pretending to work. I don't know what he's doing, but Nate,
I'm
over
not pretending
to you.
To work. I am on very much on real PTO, but I'm joining you.
Real PTO, and he joins us. I love it.
It's because I love you, Jay. For sure. And I'll turn my camera on. I was having some issues before. If anything starts happening, let me know and I'll turn it off. But it seems to be more stable than it was. But yeah, I will be walking through Code Engine and then a workflow that we did in real life. And I actually had some help from Dan and Trevor to get me over the finish line last week. But yeah, I'll walk through that now. So let me just share my screen.
Why Nate shares that quick call out, Code Engine. So Trevor eloquently pointed out that those first two shapes are when an action's taken, right? That one with a gear, that's a service task. The service task runs a little snippet of code, and that code lives in Code Engine, right? So what oftentimes people will find is I might go through that exercise of getting my process down on the canvas, and maybe there's a step in there that says, update the case in Salesforce. I may not know how to do that, but I can go to someone who does and say, hey, write me a function that updates a case in Salesforce. I have a case ID and I have a note or whatever. That person goes in Code Engine, they write that function, and then that function is available for somebody who may not be versed in the code to leverage. And that's where you go create those, bespoke experiences like Nate's going to show you.
For sure. Appreciate the precursor, Dan. Cool. Well, I know a lot of you know me. Some of you do not. So just wanted to do a quick intro. So as I said, I'll be walking through Code Engine and workflows. My name is Nate Baer. I'm the engineering manager that oversees partner analytics at Sony Interactive Entertainment. If you were fortunate enough to see Mr. John Taft at the keynote for Domo+DataCrew, the team he was mentioning that oversees 3,000 plus instances, that is the team that I manage. So given the complexities there and a lot of the manual scripting that we use, having something to orchestrate that has been something we've been really excited and looking forward to. But basically what our team does is we oversee the flow of telemetry and metadata from PS Console to Domo and provide insights to partners on how their games and recent marketing efforts are performing across the PlayStation Network. So you can see here Parappa the Rapper, if anybody's familiar with some OG PS1 games, and Hello Domo. So that's the collaboration here. So as far as an agenda goes, and I don't have many slides, just wanted to give you all some background so this can kind of make sense conceptually as well. So why use Code Engine and workflows? I'll talk through that briefly, the project overview, and then we'll go into the actual walkthroughs and demo. So our reason for adoption here is basically sum it into one line. to automate repeatable / currently manual processes to give meaningful development time back to our engineers. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of disparate scripts that right now a few of us will run, and basically we run them manually, and then we check. It's like, oh, did PDP get applied? Okay, now we can add a virtual user. Virtual users are there, now we can create a publish job, and so on and so forth. So that piece is huge. And then we needed a central location to create, run, and orchestrate the processes across a vast network of game publishers and developers. So this is speaking to Jay, what you were talking about earlier in terms of security, like doing this all within the walls of Domo and having that all there. And then proper version control, which we had all talked about earlier in terms of if you create a code engine function and you need to make changes to it, having it be an entirely different version that's to not break a current workflow in flight that you or others could be using, and vice versa with workflows. And then another key point here is the serverless and streamlined piece. And this was actually the reason why I started looking into Code Engine in the first place. So if anybody's familiar with Jupyter Notebooks within Domo, which is awesome, by the way, it can take sometimes 3 to 4 minutes to spin up VM CPU. And for what we needed in terms of user creation, and I'll walk through this in a minute, but to create users, we're basically ingesting events from a Kafka topic, and we needed to, in near real time, create these users because we did some analysis that within the first 5 minutes of a user getting assigned or provisioned to analytics, which is Domo, I think it was 8% of people are logging in within that 5-minute range. Then it was 13% within the first 10. So we just needed to be really automatic so the user, their account would be there. So serverless and streamline, that's a big one. And then this initial onboarding use case, I think this is where we started talking about this maybe a year and a half ago with Jace McLean in terms of how can we start orchestrating these processes? Because as I mentioned, we have a lot of pre-published steps where we're setting up PDP for all of our 3,000 plus partners on all of our 90 plus data sets. And then we need to get those into a publish job via script. And then we have these post-publish steps where it's sharing the content, both pages and data sets. It's updating the landing page and making sure that this can be something that's automated, because we're moving to a world where we'll just be ingesting events and then doing these things in Domo and just creating instances. But that's not what I'll be walking through today. What I'll be walking through today is the initial project for user creation. So just to give a little background, analytics, partner analytics, it's just one of the many apps available to our partners within our apps portal. So when they sign up, they get a host of apps that they've been provisioned to. And right now, when a user gets added by the admin, an email gets sent to them within, I would say, 30 seconds to a minute. And then they click a link, and behind the scenes, our IDP will route them to the correct instance that they're supposed to go to, and the user gets created just in time with a default role of just like viewer, partner user is what we call it. In this brave new world, we need that to be fully integrated, where the role actually gets assigned in our portal and that travels through to Domo. So they could be a partner user, a partner admin, and then it also gives them the ability to have that user be there immediately instead of waiting for them to sign in, because we've heard feedback from partners, admins specifically, that they want to be able to share content with a specific person, but they're not showing up in the instance. They just provisioned them. What's going on? It's because we're currently doing the just-in-time provisioning, so just getting rid of that piece. So the fully integrated view will look like a user gets created upstream in the portal. There's an immediate signal that gets sent to Domo via data set. So that's our Kafka interpreter sending this in real time. And then Domo actions on the instruction set all within seconds. So that's what I'll be walking through today. I have here just walkthroughs and demos, so I can exit out of here, and I have a bunch of tabs up to walk through this. But any questions on use case or anything before I dive into Code Engine? Cool. So you'll see here Code Engine. It's this symbol over here. You can navigate to it from Data Center or from the Workflows page as well. But both times it looks just like the brackets here. And just a little piece of advice for setting these up. And you can see Domo took the liberty of setting up some of these, what I refer, they're packages, but I kind of think of them as classes. So breaking these into like Domo scheduled reports, all this is going to be functions about scheduled reports, sandbox, all sandbox related, page related, which is really great to do it by subject, because that will really help you scale. What I did when I first did this is I set up a Code Engine where it's just like all the functions for my one thing to do, just because it was kind of nice to see it sequentially. But then I broke it up into these 3 Code Engine packages. So first one is authentication. So basically getting credentials from those accounts Jay mentioned from whatever coworker can set up .envs, he who must not be named, may or may not have been me. And then the users and roles piece, because we need to be able to get a role and assign that ID at the time of login, and then this AppDB one at the end, because we'll be logging these to an AppDB. So just diving in and showing you a little bit what this looks like. So
real quick,
go for it.
just one thing that wasn't obvious to me, and Nate, you did a good job talking through some of your methodology, but a package can have a lot of functions, right? Mm-hmm. And so think of the package as, like, Nate mentioned how he kind of organizes things categorically. I too fell trapped to, I had like a bunch of packages that all had one function. So just understand that, right? And they don't even necessarily have to be related. However it works in your mind, works for this. Just think through the way that it's presented to the end user, and that they first explore a package, and then from inside of that package, they're presented with functions. So.
For sure.
Yeah, and remember that every package and every function you write is reusable, right? For yourself and for everyone else on your team. You write it once, you drop it in your workflow from then on.
Right.
Love that, Nate.
For sure. So this first piece around authentication, and again, this isn't really a coding boot camp, but I think we have the two options of Python and JavaScript. So similar to any Python script, you need to import the modules that you'll be using with any script, but it's just all function based, which is really cool. And then these functions, as soon as you test them out and get them working here, you can leverage them in a workflow later on. So just to kind of show an example, for this first one, getting cred. So you can see it intakes an account name. So anything that you add into your parentheses here is going to show up as an input. So you can see account name. If I were to add something else, it would show up. And you need to be really specific about what is that data type. So you'll get options in here. I can show you. I'll just create a new version or pretend to. I'll end up just deleting this. But if I add something like account name, and let's just say password, right? Then I save this, or I don't even need to save it. It shows up here. And here's where you have all these different data types. And if you enter the wrong data type, you'll get an error that this is incorrect to check it. So you'll know ahead of time what these inputs are. Passwords typically text, and then you click check, and then you save it. But for this here, I'm just going to go back. I'm going to delete that just so I don't leave it in there. But basically, to show an example, and you can see these accounts over here on the left. So I'll just type in this NB fake creds, and you can basically just click play here, add a value, and you can start passing variables for testing it. And at the bottom, you'll see the console and the response starts spinning up. So this should spit back a fake username and password, which it does. This is fake, and then you can see it's definitely fake by seeing the password, J for president. But that is the first piece. And once you have your credentials, then you can authenticate into an instance. So there's many ways to authenticate into Domo. You can use client ID and secret. You can use a token. For this demo, I was just using username and password, full authentication that way. And getting a dev token to use for sequential steps. But that is kind of high level, the authentication piece. And then the next piece is users and roles. So to create a user in an instance for the payload, you can see over here, you need to know what the instance is. You need a dev token, you need a name, email, role ID. So over here, the first piece is I am getting sent in my input. I have the user's name, what their role should be, and it's the role name. So I need to actually pass the role ID. So for this first piece, it's actually getting what that role ID is. So if I click play on here, you'll see the three inputs that I need to have are the Domo instance, the dev token, and the role name. So I took the liberty of just populating a token prior to this, just so I didn't have to go through that. So let me just copy that in. And then the Domo instance is domo-community.domo.com. And then the role name, let's just say, is participant. All right, so we're going to start that function. And it's going to give us back this ID, which can be used in the next step. So we get this response, says 4, so it's ID 4. And now we can actually go ahead and we can test this here, and it will actually make the API calls and create a user. So if I go to this next step, create user, kind of the same thing here, right? Copy in this token, the Domo instance, domo.community. Oh, wait, yeah, .domo.com. And then name we'll just say is jtest. Email, I'll just assign it to like fake alias at sony.com. And then role ID is 4, right? So we'll start this function. Then we'll go over to people and we'll see if that user got created. So you can see here, it gave me this response because I just told it to respond me a long text string of what happened. So it basically provides what the role is, the role ID, the username, the created timestamp, the modified timestamp, and the email. So all that good stuff, and the new Domo ID that was created. So if I go over here to people.
Oh, wait, real quick. Trevor, does this framework support asynchronous code execution? It must, because you have async functions in JavaScript.
Do you mean making like HTTP requests?
Yeah, so like
Yeah.
Nate just used a request library, which would be asynchronous, but if he wanted to use asynchronous.
No,
like
so actually it is asynchronous. Using that request library is asynchronous. It's going to go make a call to some endpoint, and then it's going to come back when it comes back, and then you'll have to respond when it gets back. So I don't know Python, but in JavaScript we typically use async await to just wait.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Jane, it's like when you set it up in a workflow, you can do things in parallel too. So we'll run asynchronous kind of artificially that way too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you can see this user got created, jtest participant. So that that worked. And then going back to here, the final step, and I won't dive into this one too deep, but we needed a way to log everything because we're getting all these events coming in real time that we need a way to then create a view on top of that, which will just be all of the events that came in from Kafka, then joined to the output data set to say, okay, what's been done, remove everything that's been done, and only keep things that have like a blank response or something, and I'll show you that. So basically, just very simply and literally set up this create object here where you input the Domo instance, the IDP ID, like company ID, whatever you want your output to look like to join back to your input, and just create an object. And then the next piece is appending an object to a list of objects. And then at the very end, you actually write those lists of objects to an AppDB. So I can show you what AppDB looks like if you're not familiar. And the reason why I use AppDB is it's just one of many ways you could do that. You could do a data set, but with AppDB, you could build an app on top of it potentially. And this is something that's a little more standard. So I think with that, I can walk through kind of what the workflow looks like a little bit. So dive in here.
Nate, I'm conscious you said you only have 3 minutes, so I don't.
No, all good. I can stay a little bit longer. It's all good.
Oh, so your hard stop was a lie.
My hard stop can be a little malleable, but I'll be quick. So basically, and yeah, there's a lot going on here. But I started with the loop, the iterate over a loop template here, and then added some stuff on my own. So you need to actually like initialize a list of objects before the loop. And then basically it asks, are there more rows after querying the data set? And here's where I do a parallel processing split where I can get information from the current row at the same time as I'm grabbing account credentials. So getting the current row, it will create this object, and then grabbing the account credentials will also give me back this account info object. Then you can merge the parallel branches when you're done doing things in parallel. And then these other ones need to happen sequentially where I'm authenticating in a Domo instance, I'm getting the role, I'm creating the user, and then I create the object that's basically just an output of this, right? I'm inputting all the things that came from either the current role or this create user output, that the output, which is the output for this create user, you can see here. So you kind of keep grabbing, like the output becomes an input for later steps. So create the object and then append it to a list where you basically just have this list of objects that we initialize at the start. You have your new object and then you create your mapping. And behind the scenes, the function is adding and appending to that function or to that object. So then
can I jump in real quick, Nate? I just want to make sure everyone understands that part because there were some questions earlier about passing between steps. Maybe just talk a little bit about how you're kind of building those values and modifying them as you go in variables and then passing them into subsequent steps,
Yeah, definitely. So at the start, so it starts here, right? Get the current row. and I may be in an old version. I'm seeing this isn't mapped, but basically it will have the Domo instances in the row. It has this IDP ID, this company ID, this username. So it's basically just any value in this row. So if I can go to this input quickly and show you what this looks like. So these inputs that are being outputted here are basically just column names, right? So these are all the column names. You see Domo instance, IDP ID, company ID, username. We go back to the workflows, these same things over here. This Domo instance, IDP ID, company ID. So now we have those all, and we go back into authenticating into the Domo instance where we grab their credentials. So now we have this username and password that we got from this step. And then from the current row, we have our Domo instance where we're actually authenticating to, which will output a dev token, right? And we're mapping here. And all these variables show up on the left-hand side. And then in the next step for like getting the roles, you saw me do this in Code Engine, but now in workflows, same thing. From the current row, we bring in the Domo instance. We bring in that dev token that we just outputted from the authenticate and Domo instance step, the role name, which is in the current row field. And then now we're outputting that role ID, where before, if you'll remember with participant, that was the number 4. So for create user now, it's basically just passing that payload. And again, we're still using those same variables of the current row Domo instance, the dev token, the current row the username, and the current row email, and then that role ID that we just outputted. And then from here, we're outputting this create user output, which is that long text string of basically a JSON array that shows you everything that happened and the response. And then this create object just basically takes all of the outputs from the previous pieces of the workflow and adds them to an object. And then if you have, let's say, 3 rows, you'll have 3 objects appended into this list of objects that at the very end here will get written into AppDB. And just to show you AppDB, I think I have over here, it basically just has all of these objects, right? And then once you have these objects, you sync it to a data set, and voila, that's your data set at the end. Did that kind of answer that, Trevor? Or was there anything else you're looking for?
Well, one thing that I'll say is a not overtly technical person, and if you could keep the screen right there for a second too, that'll remind me there's one other thing I wanted to speak to.
Sure.
So variables, we use that term in a couple of different places in Domo, but in here, it's really just a place where information can be stored, right? And then the information that's stored in that variable is either available to be called into a function as an input, or can be updated with a new value by an output, right? So just think of variables as the place to store, whatever information might be needed later on, and it can be updated and rewritten and whatever all you want to. So, yeah, that was, it took me a minute to kind of get my head around them as a not developer. But Elliot, you asked and you got your hand raised about the parallel gateways. This was something, and if this doesn't answer your question, please speak up. But this was something that took me a minute too. I think it's pretty straightforward when we see that parallel processing split where it goes and says, hey, get the current row and grab account creds. That makes sense to me, right? Hey, like go do both those things. But you'll notice the next step is merge parallel branches. So parallel gateways have the very obvious use of saying, hey, go do these 2 things. But they also have, at least for me, the lesser obvious use of saying, hey, we're not going to proceed out of this parallel gateway until all of the paths in are completed, right? So basically, let's say that get current row takes 2 seconds and grab account creds takes 10, right? We don't want to go on to authenticate in Domo instance until both those are completed. So that parallel gateway is essentially a sit and wait, and until all the conduits into that get there, it won't move forward. I don't know if I explained it very well as a layman.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect.
I just had one quick question, Nate. So did you say that this workflow kicks off when there's a new row in a Kafka data set, like Kafka topic publishes a row to a data set?
Yeah, and I'll walk through that piece, but that's exactly right. So it basically it will write to a data set, and then we have a view on top of that basically says, has this already been done? And I'll show that at the end too. But basically, we have an alert here that I can show you on the view where I have it called here, user create workflow trigger. So if you click here, you can actually add an action as you're going through to create an alert, and you can add an action to trigger a workflow. So if we look at this one, you can see this one's triggering this 1.03 workflow, right? Whenever this gets updated.
So then, Nate, my question is, so because I think this answers my question, but let's say, just to take it to a 10, let's say a million events get published to that Kafka data set. Does that mean then it triggers a million iterations of this workflow, or is it just one? How long does it take? That's where I think Jay's question about asynchronous code, like, can it do like if a million come in, is it just as fast as if one came in?
Yeah, that's a good question. This may be something better for Trevor and Dan too, but what I have seen is when multiple come in, it will actually just spin off multiple workflows of the same version at once. So if like 5 come in at the exact same time and it doesn't catch it all in that view, or let's say it catches the first 5, then another 10 come in, it will keep spinning up workflows. But yeah, I don't know to the millionth what that would look like. For our use case, we normally don't have more than I would say like 10 to 15 users getting created per day. So I think if this were a million, we would probably need to figure out a sophisticated solve for that. But yeah, Trevor and Dan, if you have something to add.
Well, I guess it's a good question. I don't want to make this an 11 now, since I know we're getting a little complicated, but it is something to consider that if your data is rapidly updating like that, then you have to pay attention to what is being triggered and make sure you architect your workflow in a way that makes sense. So if it's just going to update and trigger an alert every second or 2 or 5 or whatever that is, then the workflows will just spin off and they'll start running, and maybe that's what you want. But I would advise that you may consider not wanting to architect it that way and do something to help with some batching, basically, in some form. So there's a lot of ways to do that, but usually Domo does at least a small amount of batching when you're writing to a data set, and that's why, Nate, you're seeing some rows come together and you end up with an update. Dan pointed this out as well, and you'll end up with like 10 rows changed when they're all coming in on that, like a callback, right? So the other thing you can do is like what Nate's doing with AppDB is he's writing to AppDB, and that aggregates it up as well, right? So he gets a bunch that are written at the same time. So same kind of thing. You could also do like a data flow that updates it every 15 minutes or every hour or whatever it is you need, right? So there's lots of ways around that, but you should be conscious that if you do trigger an alert, and you will start workflows every time that triggers. And you will get passed in to your workflow the amount of data that was batched into that alert or that update, right? And so you might want to put some logic at the beginning of your workflow to make sure you're handling that appropriately.
I want to pause for a moment real quick, just so I can get Nate. I promised Nate 10:30, so I want to get him out of here at a reasonable time. Guys, Nate is a very strong Python developer, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think where this started is initially you wrote this entire script in Python first, and then you said, okay, the primary reason why we have to adopt workflows is because Python takes, like he was saying earlier, 3 to 5 minutes, making up numbers, before it actually runs the task, before it actually runs a script. And he wanted to get as low latency as possible. And so that path to that was to say, okay, if I re-implement this in workflows, maybe I can get past that point where I have to wait for Domo to spin up a Python environment. Those of you who are familiar with MySQL data flows, MySQL data flows back in the day, or Redshift even, would take 3 to 10 minutes before it actually started the job. The job itself was very fast, but it's that process of waiting for that environment to spin up that took time. All that to say, workflows allows Nate to get closer to real time. But he did write this code in Python first, and then because he understands how his functions work in Python, he's like, okay, let me take this function, put it into CodeEngine. Okay, I'm stringing this set of Pythons together in a for loop. Okay, I need to implement a for loop in in workflows, and then call each of these functions one at a time, right? This is basically like the very visual version of a Python script.
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. This was all in Python before, and most of the scripts I was alluding to earlier are already written. So it's just getting it to be in here, lower latency, have it be automated in a secure fashion that isn't on any one developer's computer. Cool. No, appreciate that, Jay. And then Elliot, last piece, if we get a million users in partner analytics, I'll be having an early retirement. So that's
yeah, we're all retiring. We've made our million.
Yeah, I think
that's
the real answer.
Let's go.
That's the real answer. So yeah, just to finish this off, I'll actually go through and demo how this will work. So just going over to people here, you can see some of my earlier testing. So just to walk through this, I had Wayne Gretzky, Michael Jordan, and Justin Jefferson get added from this, and by word of mouth, we had a few new joiners that also want to join now as well. So instead of doing Kafka, I'm just going to manually add some rows here. So this input. And then I think it's on sheet 2. Yep. So we can see these new users coming in. So now Tom Brady and Charles Barkley want in. They've heard good reviews about Domo from the first 3 power users here. So I'll click save. And basically, as soon as this saves, this will update the view. We'll have a couple of rows now. And then that will trigger the workflow immediately. You can see it's in progress. Like, look how quick that was. And you can go in here, and this is the instance list. And you can actually click here and view in real time, like what step it's on. I'm just going to be careful to not show any credentials here, but it will show your current row, Domo instance, IDP. Let me just, once it gets to the account info, I can minimize that. Cool. And then brings back the dev token, so the role ID, and it basically just will go through, and you can see this in real time. It update like the step it's on. Let's see here. So yeah, I went through, it did Tom Brady, now it's doing Charles Barkley. And I think that piece is done. So now it's just logging. So if we go into people now, we should see these new users. Let's refresh it. Yep, we see Tom Brady as an editor, Charles Barkley as a participant. And then the final step here is we add it to this AppDB. And yep, you see 6 results before it was 4. So down here we see Tom Brady, Charles Barkley with all of the other metadata. And one thing to mention too about AppDB, not to nerd out too much on this piece, but it updates every 15 minutes. I hit the endpoint to sync it as soon as this updates. So this will actually update the data set here. You can see now there's 6 rows, and this is the AppDB data set that gets populated automatically with that metadata. So Tom Brady, Charles Barkley added. And then the final piece, which I was saying, using the view, now the view is empty again. And the reason for that is looking in the view, we join it to that output. And then we have this filter that basically says this create user output, we bring this in, and we only want where it's blank. So you can see all these 6 other users that have been created. We don't want these to show up in the view because otherwise they'll just keep getting created every time. But that is kind of the end-to-end view that we have currently. And with that, I can open it up to more questions and conversation. But I appreciate you guys letting me nerd out with you on some code engine and workflows.
Nate, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I think I owe you some brownies or at least some 80% code.
I'll take 80% code any day.
Nice. Okay, so we're definitely over time. Nate, thank you so much for that take it to 11 version of a workflow. Dan, thank you so much for the version 1 answer my dumb questions version of the workflow. I see we have a ton of other people on the call. We put this together to try to answer your questions. So 1, please do not be overwhelmed by Nate's code. He did a lot, right? It's not just he stepped into Code Engine and is like, oh, we're going to make this work on day 1. He actually, like I said, scripted this out in Python first. So like, if that's not your background, that's okay too. Dan will be the first to admit he's like not a Python developer, but obviously he's very much a spokesperson for workflows. So like someplace in the middle, there's a happy medium. So check. I wanted to say that. Questions, thoughts, comments, concerns?
Well, real quick, let me just say how awesome it is that Nate, who is technical and is a good Python developer, can put these functions together, these packages together, and then anyone can use them in his organization. Like Dan was saying, Dan may lean on some of us on the engineering team, or he may just ask ChatGPT to write him a function, and that's awesome. And then forevermore, he's leveraging that in workflows. That's the power.
Yeah, and for sure. And we talked about it too a bit at Palooza, I think, in Cab, in terms of being able to publish this even outside of just my org, using the App Store. That'd be something really powerful, right? Like I'm thinking just in terms of Domo community, we have maybe a channel that's just code engine packages or workflows where we can work together to create those packages and publish them and really collaborate in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and we want to make that easier. It's coming. It's going to take a little bit, but it's coming for sure. Love that idea, Nate.
Thanks.
Hey, Bobby, shoot me a note. We've got a customer. I won't mention him here for lots of different reasons, but we got a customer that's doing exactly what you're talking about, where they're doing real-time audit of PDP on rapidly and frequently changing roles and locations and all sorts of crazy hierarchy. I'd love to put me in touch with that individual, and I think they'd be happy to talk to you about what they're doing and how they got there, but don't want to do it in the public forum. But please reach out to me. You get me on, it's just Dan.Hendrickson at Domo. Watch the spelling, or you can hit me on Slack or whatever. Would love to talk to you about it.
Just real quick, like, in case anybody's wondering, it is definitely possible to extract your code engine functions. And so I can go in and say, oh, this is that function from the Domo Awards package version 2.05. Yeah, that totally exists. And then so like if you're in a place where you are using a version control tool, you know, that can be done. Anyway.
Jay, we store all of our packages in Git ourselves before we publish them.
Nice.
So.
Well, and hey, I know I put a comment out here on it. If nobody's going to speak up, I just want to share. It supports it's super high throughput tool and supports concurrent process, right? So you can have, workflow version 1.0.0. You can have 10,000 versions of that workflow all running all at the same time, all at different stages. So please don't think that you have to architect a workflow in a way that, it needs to get done before it can get to the next one. And lots of cases where, you'll have workflows start other workflows. That's a really common one that wasn't intuitive to me, but it could be every day I want to run a query and get a list of items that meet this parameter, and then I want to go do something with them. That could involve a human in the loop. It could involve all sorts of conditional logic and things that take time. And so taking our list of, let's call it 10 things, and starting 10 different workflows so that they can all be running concurrently, is a very common thing, so that, you don't end up having a user task on step one that prohibits the second one from ever getting processed, right? Because that person's out of office or whatever. So just realize, high throughput, lots of concurrent versions, and I'm sure Ryan and Trevor and the team has done some testing, but I think we got a workflow internally in Domo that's got over 800 simultaneous versions running. They've all got several user tasks, so we use this workflow a lot, and they're all working great. I don't know at what point the thing would break. I don't want to say it's infinite, but the threshold is very high. Ryan and Trevor, do we know? I mean, is it even worth discussing what it would be? I mean, I know it's tremendous. Go ahead, Ryan.
Just to echo your point, Dan, it's built to scale, so run as many as you need. I don't think we've maxed it out yet in our performance testing. So, you can run as many instances concurrently as needed, and we have yet to find that breaking point. So when we get there, we'll let you know. But it's built to scale.
Yeah.
Coming back to, go ahead, Trevor.
As Nate said earlier, these are serverless functions, so it's just running in the cloud, right? It just scales out the functions and you'll just run. So, I mean, it's super scale. And right now, just so you know, we're running on Lambda for Amazon and the equivalents in other clouds. So it's built to scale, right? That's what this does really well. The engine itself, it just tries to get out of the way and just execute those cloud functions. So it really is high throughput, like Dan's saying. The only thing we've done that's maxed it out, and maybe you've experienced this, I expect Jay is someone who would have hit this barrier. We try to prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot. And so when you get on an endless loop, we will kill it and tell you that you ran this many times. And I think our limit right now is 1,000 loops before we'll kill it for you. That is configurable, but that's the only thing we've maxed out.
Right.
And purposely we do try to help you out there.
And guys, to just put some frame of reference around like this question of scale and like how many functions we can have running at the same time, right? Remember when Dan originally showed his form, that approval form? I think what everyone's trying to say is like, I can have 1, 5, 20, 1,000 approval forms that are open, or maybe it's a multi-stage approval process. I can have 1,000 of these forms in various stages of completion. I'm not really worried about Domo crapping out, right? Or like the queue getting too long. I think that's kind of what they were speaking to, is like when you have this human in the loop, or in Nate's case, I'm generating 1,000 users or whatever, right? That's what we're talking about here.
Can we shift? I want to answer Christopher's question, but I need to understand it a little bit better. Is Christopher available to kind of speak to that question?
Yeah. So the command line is basically it's a product you can download, and then it allows you to log into your Tableau server, and you can manage things like the dashboards that you have. You can delete them. You can bulk delete them. The groups, people, their roles, what they're able to see. I'm a Domo user, and I've been trying to basically do this with the R SDK, and I've been struggling with it. I've heard or I've read that the Python SDK is better for this. I'm just not as comfortable in that language.
So I'd like Jay to answer this actually, but really quickly, one of the things that we've done with workflows is really kind of wrap those same kind of CLI functions into packages that you can leverage in workflows in a visual way. But there's certainly a need still for CLI, and I know Jay is, some of the community members here could speak better to how they've leveraged that.
Yeah, Christopher, it sounds like you're trying to do things manually, like go into the terminal and like type out a set of commands like on a case-by-case basis. That is absolutely possible using, Domo calls it the Java CLI, but I think it's going to be called the Domo CLI utility. Elliot, you got a link for me? But it just runs in,
Yeah, 1 second.
It just runs in Java. And like I said, you have your commands that will allow you to delete a dashboard, add users, or whatever thing that you would want to do in the UI via terminal. So check. Yes, that definitely does exist. And as Nate was demonstrating, if you know the APIs to hit, you can write a Python script or an R script that will do the same thing. To your question of the R or the Python SDK, they do not cover the full set of functionality that exists in Domo in terms of like what button I could click in the UI or what I can actually do. And so that's part of the reason why Nate, wrote the scripts that he's written, or I've got a library called Domo library that's publicly available on GitHub that does all of the automation that I do in my work as well. Does that answer the question?
I think so, yes.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say target workflows for things that you want to do repeatedly and automatically, like that you don't want to have to like open a terminal for every time, right?
So I've got a cool example though, if I could share it. We have some internal people who are, we've been working a lot with Snowflake lately, and just think about what a Snowflake DBA does most of the time. It has something to do with like sharing, creating, granting access, things like that all day long. And so it's a series of SQL statements, right? 3 or 4 SQL statements in a row, and they're just changing like 1 or 2 parameters. That's a perfect example of what Jay said of repeatable kind of things that we do. Great. Let's just put a couple steps, a couple functions in a workflow and hit run with a couple parameters like Nate was showing in his example. Highly repeatable and actually can really save people a lot of pain by reducing errors, right?
Well, cool. I had scheduled this to go until 11. Domo team, thank you everyone from Domo side who kind of showed up to help answer questions and all of the things. I'm not going to hold you guys longer than, well, I said 10:30, but we're here till 11. So feel free to drop off whenever you guys need to. But Elliot, what's up, dude? Thanks, Dan.
I have a random question since we were talking about the CLI. My question was like, so I've been using like the log API command in the CLI, and Andrea showed us that. So is it safe to say like anything that you do in the Java CLI, it's just a wrapper around an API that already exists in Domo, so you can, like if I wanted to, I could just figure out what the API is and then use JavaScript or Python, whatever I'm comfortable with, instead of having to do the CLI. Is that an accurate statement, or is that like, are there some bad assumptions there?
Do you mean in Code Engine specifically?
No, I just mean in general, just a general.
In general, yes, but there has been some engineering that's been applied to the CLI or the Java SDK really to make it a little bit more durable. Things like retries and stuff like that. But yes, it's just hitting the same APIs.
Kind of building on that question, Trevor, are you aware of any limitations to any APIs that we cannot hit, Domo internal APIs that we cannot hit that we could hit from outside of Code Engine or outside of workflows?
No,
I
not
noticed,
really.
okay,
Go ahead.
because I saw that Nate was using full authentication.
Yeah, let me say something about it real quick, because there was an issue that came to us over from support, and Nate can do that if he wants. It is not a very secure way of doing it, though. Just because you have to be very careful about locking down access to the executions of the workflow. Because if you click on, we showed on stage the ability to replay a workflow. Well, in that process, you can see every value that was passed between steps.
Right.
So if you're passing a username and password between steps, you can see those.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's actually why Nate kind of shrank the screen while he was scrolling through.
Right. So
okay.
Like there's a bunch of ways to be smart about that. One is, as Nate has likely done, is just lock down access. So, he or a small group are the only people that can actually see the executions of the workflows. The other thing would be to kind of collapse some of those functions together into a single function so that you don't have to pass those around.
Ooh, and that becomes tough though.
Right. It makes it less reusable, but it does keep all of the credentials and everything within the same function. It never gets logged in any form. So those are some of the options and things you might want to consider. Be careful about passing around sensitive data in clear text.
Can you access? Well, we saw that Nate was able to access the account object.
Yeah.
To pull the credentials. So it sounds like a preferred method would be to pass the name of the account object into that function and then generate a token at function execution.
Right. Yep. So he did that in one of the functions that he showed us. Mm-hmm. He was calling the get account function, and then that will return the actual credentials, but he was then taking those and passing them out of the function and then using them in the next steps. And that will definitely show usernames, passwords, or whatever credentials you've got stored there.
And guys, if your eyes are starting to glaze over, like that's fine too. But I think stuff like this is important, right? And just something that should be obvious but maybe isn't, or you should know but might not be obvious, is that you can call other Code Engine functions within a Code Engine function, right? So if Nate just passed the account name into create user, and within create user it called get auth object, then we would skip the part where he's outputting the access token. That's ultimately what Trevor's speaking to. And I think, again, guys, as we're talking about writing functions that hit all of the various endpoints, all of the different external APIs we want to hit, we don't want to store our OpenAI key, right, in clear text, right? These are the kinds of things we're talking about here.
Or commit them to GitHub.
Or commit them to GitHub, which some idiot recently did. Yeah, real. So embarrassing. Just wanted to let you guys know, next week, same time, Andrea Henderson is going to be talking about some of the quality of life improvements that came from Magic ETL, including the new join stuff. So I'm stoked to bring her to the call. I'm not saying this is going to be a weekly thing, but I am going to try to get back into the habit of hosting sessions like this. So appreciate everyone who joined.